Music, can you believe it? Sold for $100. Take her, she's yours now. No, please. Alina Carter never imagined that the woman she called mother would one day put a price on her. For a mere $100, her stepmother sold her to a homeless Korean man everyone dismissed as worthless. As Alina walked away beside this complete stranger, her stepsister could not stop laughing, and her stepmother smiled, convinced she had finally gotten rid of the biggest burden in her life. What neither of them realized was that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives, because the homeless man they looked down on was the one person they should never have underestimated. And when the truth finally came to light, nothing would ever be the same again. Before we begin, if you discovered that your own family had sold you for just $100, would you ever forgive them? Share your answer in the comments below, and also let me know the city you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let us see how Alina's life changed forever. Morning sunlight poured through the windows of the Carter mansion, but for Alina Carter, another day had begun long before the rest of the family opened their eyes. While the house slept, she was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast, not because she wanted to, but because her stepmother believed the help should always wake before the family. The cruelest irony was that Alina was not the help. She was the daughter of the man who had built the mansion. After her father's death, that truth no longer seemed to matter, and the home that once belonged to her had become the place where she worked without pay. Every morning followed the same routine. She cleaned every room, prepared every meal, washed every load of laundry, and scrubbed the marble floors until they gleamed. By the time the family came downstairs, everything was already done, yet nothing she did was ever enough. One mistake, or even something as small as a misplaced item, was enough to make her the first person blamed. Sometimes Alina wondered if anyone in that house still remembered she was family, or if they had all decided she had always been the servant. Only one thing kept her going. Hidden inside the pocket of her apron was an old photograph of her late father. Whenever no one was watching, she would take it out and quietly smile. It reminded her of a time when this house was filled with laughter instead of cruelty, a time when she was loved. You would have known what to do, she whispered, gently tracing her father's face. I miss you, Dad. Before she could wipe away the tears gathering in her eyes, a sharp voice echoed through the mansion. Alina, her stepmother, called. She slipped the photograph back into her pocket. Yes, ma'am, she answered instinctively before hurrying out. She had no idea that by the end of the day, her life would never be the same again. You called for me, ma'am? Instead of answering, her stepmother looked toward the gate. A man slowly walked inside. His clothes were worn, his shoes covered in dust, and the weariness on his face spoke of countless nights without a place to call home. Alina frowned, unable to recall the last time her stepmother had welcomed a homeless stranger into the mansion. Before she could ask why, her stepmother rested a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected that Alina froze. This is the girl, her stepmother said. The man looked at Alina for a long moment, his expression revealing nothing. Then he quietly nodded, and without a word, he reached into his jacket and handed a small bundle of cash to Margaret. She counted it, and a satisfied smile spread across her face. $100. Only then did Alina notice the silence hanging in the room. Her eyes shifted from the money to the stranger and then back to her stepmother. You have lived under my roof long enough, Margaret said coldly. From today, you are leaving with him. The words refused to make sense. Alina searched her stepmother's face, hoping to find even the smallest hint that this was some cruel joke, but there was none. That is when the truth finally hit. She had not been asked to leave. She had been sold for $100. A cold feeling settled in Alina's chest. Why? Margaret looked at the money in her hand and said, because he paid for you. Everything inside Alina froze. No, she slowly shook her head. This is not funny. Margaret's expression never changed. Does this look like a joke? Alina turned to Vanessa, desperately searching for someone to tell her this had gone too far, but instead Vanessa smiled, not with sympathy but with satisfaction. In that moment, Alina understood. They had both wanted this. The tears finally escaped, not because of the money, but because she realized she had never been part of the family they pretended to be. Margaret pointed toward the gate and said, "Leave." Alina could not move. I said, "Leave." Margaret walked inside the house, picked up a small travel bag, and dropped it at Alina's feet. I packed your things this morning. Alina looked down. Everything she owned, including the photograph of her father, fit inside a single bag. This had not been a sudden decision. It had all been planned before she was ever called outside. With trembling hands, she picked up the bag. There was nothing left to say. Without looking back, Alina walked out of the Carter mansion. No one tried to stop her, no one called her name, and just like that, the place she had once called home disappeared behind her. The moment Alina stepped beyond the mansion gates, the afternoon breeze brushed against her face. It was the same breeze she had felt countless times before, but this time she knew she was not coming back. Alina tightened her grip on the small travel bag and quietly followed the stranger. Neither of them spoke. After several minutes, she finally broke the silence. "Why?" The man kept walking. "You had enough money to buy me." Her voice trembled. "So why me?" He remained silent for a moment, and then without looking back, he answered, "Because you needed somewhere to go." Alina blinked. It was not the answer she had expected. She had prepared herself for greed, for cruelty, for something far worse. Instead, she was left with another question. Nothing about the man walking ahead of her made sense. His worn clothes, tired face, and weathered shoes told the story of someone struggling to survive, yet he had spent $100 on a complete stranger. The more Alina tried to understand him, the more mysterious he became, and without realizing it, she had just taken the first step into a life she never could have imagined. After a few minutes, the stranger turned into a quiet street lined with aging buildings. He stopped in front of a small house and pushed open the rusty gate. Only then did he glance back at Alina. She stepped inside. The tiny courtyard held little more than a few worn chairs, an old bicycle, and neatly folded blankets. It was not much, but it was clean. The stranger placed his bag by the door before turning to her. "You can leave if you want." Alina stared at him. "You bought me, so why would you let me leave?" His expression remained calm. "I did not bring you here to make you my prisoner. I brought you here because you needed somewhere to go." The words lingered in the air. Alina looked toward the open gate. She was free to leave, but freedom meant nothing when there was nowhere left to go. The Carter mansion was no longer her home, and there was no one else waiting for her. She looked back at the man and said, "I will stay." He gave a quiet nod and opened the door. As Alina stepped inside, she had no idea that the man she believed was homeless was hiding a secret that would change her life forever. If you have made it this far, you are going to love what happens next. Kindly take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Alina stepped inside and quietly looked around. The room was small and modest with old furniture that had clearly survived years of use. It was not luxurious, but it was spotless. Everything had been carefully arranged, as though someone took pride in the little they had. The stranger placed his bag by the door and said, "You can have the bed." Alina looked at him. "What about you?" "I will sleep out here." She frowned. The room was barely large enough for one person, yet he had offered her the only bed without hesitation. Once again, he did something she could not understand. He walked over to the small stove and poured water into a pot. "I will make something for us to eat." Alina quietly set her bag beside the bed. Just a few hours ago, she had walked out of the Carter mansion believing she had lost everything. Now she found herself under the roof of a man who owed her nothing, yet had shown her more kindness in a single afternoon than her own family had in years. For the first time that day, she did not feel afraid. She simply wondered who was Chajahan. The days that followed were unlike anything Alina had ever known. Life inside the little house was simple, but for the first time in years, it was peaceful. Jihan never treated her like a burden or reminded her she had once been sold for $100. Instead, he treated her with a quiet kindness she was still learning to accept. As the days passed, Alina found herself smiling more often than she had in years. Then she noticed something. Every morning before sunrise, Jihan quietly left the house. He never said where he was going, and every evening he returned as though nothing had happened. Alina wanted to ask, but she never did. Somehow she knew he was carrying a story he was not ready to tell, and for the first time she found herself wanting to know it. Weeks slowly turned into months. Alina found a modest job at a nearby cafe. The pay was not much, but earning her own money reminded her she could still stand on her own. Each evening she returned to the little house that had quietly become home. Life with Jihan was peaceful. There were no harsh words, no fear, and no conditions attached to his kindness. As the months passed, Alina found herself falling in love with the man who had restored the peace she thought she had lost forever. Yet one question refused to leave her mind. Sometimes strangers would look at Jihan with unmistakable recognition. Before anyone could approach, he would calmly lead Alina away. The first time she asked about it, he simply smiled and said they had mistaken him for someone else. Alina smiled back, but she did not believe him. Meanwhile, Margaret remained convinced she had made the best decision of her life. Whenever Alina's name came up, she laughed at the thought of her struggling beside a homeless man. Vanessa was no different. Neither of them realized the daughter they had thrown away was happier than she had ever been, and the decision they celebrated would soon become the greatest mistake of their lives. One afternoon, Jihan's phone rang. The moment he looked at the screen, the calm expression Alina had grown used to disappeared. He stepped outside to answer. Less than a minute later, he returned. "There are a few things I need to take care of," he said quietly. Before Alina could ask another question, he was gone. He did not return that night or the next. As worry slowly replaced hope, Alina searched for the only clue he had left behind, the number that had called him. When she dialed it, a calm voice gave her an address. She expected a small office, but instead a towering corporate headquarters stood before her. Luxury cars filled the entrance as executives hurried through the revolving doors. Then, without warning, everyone stopped one after another. Employees lowered their heads. "Welcome back, Chairman Cha." Alina turned toward the entrance. A black luxury sedan came to a stop, the door opened, and Jihan stepped out. Gone were the worn clothes and weathered shoes. In their place was a perfectly tailored suit and the quiet confidence of a man who belonged at the very top. He acknowledged the greetings and walked inside as though he had done it 1,000 times before. Only then did Alina understand. The homeless man she had fallen in love with was Chairman Cha Jihan, one of the richest and most powerful CEOs in Korea. Alina stood in silence. Everything she believed about Cha Jihan had been turned upside down. When they were finally alone, she looked at him and asked why. Jihan was quiet for a moment, and then he looked out through the window. "For years, people only saw my money," he said. "They wanted my name, my influence, what I could give them." He paused. "After a while, I could not tell who cared about me and who cared about my wealth. So he walked away. He left behind the mansion, the luxury cars, and the life everyone envied. For the first time in years, people treated him without knowing who he was. Some ignored him, some looked down on him, but at least their reactions were honest. Then he turned to Alina. "You never knew I was Chairman Cha. You only knew Jihan, the man who shared a meal with you. The man you chose before you knew what I owned." Alina felt her eyes fill with tears. At that moment, she realized Jihan had not been hiding his wealth. He had been searching for something money could never buy, someone who would love the man before the billionaire. Months passed. The life Alina had once thought impossible slowly became her reality. She and Jihan built a life together, and before long they were married. As chairman of one of Korea's most powerful companies, Jihan's public appearances rarely went unnoticed. One evening they attended the annual charity gala hosted by his company. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, camera flashes lit up the night. Reporters called Jihan's name from every direction. Through it all, he never let go of Alina's hand. Miles away, Margaret and Vanessa sat in their living room with the television playing in the background. Neither of them paid much attention until the presenter spoke. "Chairman Cha Jihan arrives tonight with his wife, Alina Cha." Margaret slowly looked up. Vanessa turned toward the screen. The cameras settled on the couple. For a moment, neither woman moved. There was Alina, the girl they had sold for $100, now standing beside one of the richest men in Korea as his wife. The room fell silent. Every cruel word, every insult, every decision they had made came rushing back. Only now did they understand what they had thrown away, not because they loved Alina, but because their greed had cost them a future they could never get back. The morning after the televised gala, 2 unexpected visitors arrived at the Cha residence. Margaret and Vanessa stepped out of a taxi wearing warm smiles that had never existed before. They barely reached the front door before Alina appeared. For a moment, no one spoke. Margaret forced a smile and said, "Alina, we have missed you." Vanessa quickly nodded and added, "We have been so worried about you." Alina looked at them quietly. Not long ago, she would have believed every word. Margaret reached for her hand. "We made mistakes. We are still your family. Come home." Alina gently pulled her hand away. "My home is already here." Margaret's smile faded. "We only want another chance." Alina met her eyes and said, "The day you sold me for $100, you stopped being my family." Silence filled the space between them. Without another word, Alina turned and walked back through the gates. Margaret could only watch. The frightened girl she had once controlled was gone, and for the first time she realized there was something far more valuable than money. A second chance, one she would never get. And so the girl who had once been sold for $100 found something far more valuable than money. She found a place where she was loved, respected, and finally treated as family. Margaret and Vanessa were left with the consequences of the choice greed had made for them. But Alina never looked back, because the people who tried to throw her life away had unknowingly led her to the life she was always meant to find. As for Cha Jihan, he finally found the one person who loved the man before the billionaire. And sometimes that is the greatest fortune anyone could ever have. So, tell us in the comments if you were Alina, would you have forgiven Margaret and Vanessa after everything they did? We would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next one. Until then, take care and remember, the greatest love is not measured by wealth. It is measured by the heart that chooses you when there is nothing to gain.